Have you ever helped someone you loved, only to watch them mistake your kindness for weakness? If so, this story will hit closer to home than you ever imagined. Because sometimes the people who betray you aren't strangers, they're family. One phone call, that's all it took to shatter 30 years of trust. But before this story is over, the people who believed they could take everything from me will learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Before we begin, if you've ever dreamed of seeing justice served to someone who crossed the line, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end. I promise you this revenge wasn't fueled by hatred. It was fueled by consequences. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 58 years old, born and raised in Georgia, and until last spring I believed my family was the one thing money could never destroy. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs everywhere. They were flashing like bright red lights, begging me to pay attention. But when it's your own child, you convince yourself everything will work out. That's what fathers do. We hope, even when hope is the most dangerous thing we have. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen, watching fresh coffee drip into my favorite mug, while sunlight poured through the windows. The smell of toasted bread filled the room, and my wife, Grace, was humming softly as she watered the flowers outside. It felt like every other peaceful morning we'd earned, after decades of hard work. Then my phone rang. The screen showed my son's name, Ethan. I smiled before answering. "Morning, son." His voice sounded strange, flat, nervous, like someone trying to hide bad news behind casual words. "Dad." There was a long pause. "We sold the house." I blinked. The coffee in my hand suddenly felt heavier. "You, what?" "The house. We closed the sale this morning." For several seconds I couldn't find my voice. That house wasn't just a house. Grace and I had helped them buy it years ago. We'd sacrificed vacations, delayed retirement, even borrowed against investments because we wanted our son to start adulthood on solid ground instead of drowning in debt. We weren't wealthy because we'd been lucky. We were comfortable because we'd spent 30 years saying no to ourselves. No luxury cars, no expensive vacations, no designer clothes. Every dollar had a purpose. Every sacrifice had built something lasting. And now, my son had sold the very home we'd helped him build without saying a single word to us. "Why?" I finally asked. Another silence. Then came the sentence that made every muscle in my body tighten. "Actually, that's why I'm calling." I already knew I wasn't going to like what came next. Ethan and Vanessa were wondering if, maybe, we could stay with you and Mom for a little while. My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. The warmth no longer reached my hands. "How long is a little while?" Silence. "Again, we'll figure it out." Something cold settled deep inside my chest. Not anger, not yet. Instinct, the quiet voice that whispers when something isn't right. I should have trusted it. Instead, I sighed. "Family helps family," I said. "You can stay in the guest house until you get back on your feet." The relief in Ethan's voice came too quickly. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd understand." As I hung up, Grace looked at me from across the kitchen. "What happened?" I forced a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Our son just sold his house." Her watering can stopped in midair. And somehow, I stared out the window, a strange knot forming in my stomach. I have a feeling this isn't the whole story. I had no idea how right that feeling was. Because while Ethan was asking for a place to stay, his wife Vanessa had already burned through more money than most people earn in a decade. And before this nightmare ended, she wouldn't just want my guest house. She'd decide she deserved my home. If someone had asked me a year earlier whether my own son would hide a financial disaster from me, I would have laughed. Not because Ethan was perfect, but because Grace and I had spent our entire lives teaching him one simple lesson. Money comes and goes. Character stays forever. At least, that's what we believed. Unfortunately, there was one person in his life who believed something very different. Her name was Vanessa Brooks, and she saw money as something that existed to impress people she'd never meet again. A week after Ethan and Vanessa moved into our guest house, I started noticing little things. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they painted a picture I wish I'd seen sooner. Every other day, delivery trucks pulled into our driveway carrying expensive furniture. Boxes from luxury fashion brands stacked outside the guest house like Christmas had come early. A brand new black Range Rover appeared one afternoon. I walked outside, staring at the gleaming SUV. "Ethan," I asked calmly, "did you buy this?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's leased." "Leased?" Vanessa thought it would help with appearances. Appearances. That word echoed inside my head. Since when did appearances matter more than security? I didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, I simply watched. And the more I watched, the worse it became. One evening, Grace walked into the living room holding her phone with a troubled expression. "You need to see this." She handed it to me. Vanessa had posted a glamorous video from a luxury resort. Champagne, private cabanas, ocean views, designer sunglasses. The caption read, "Manifesting abundance. We deserve this life." I stared at the screen. That trip wasn't cheap. Grace slowly shook her head. There are dozens more. Vacation after vacation. Luxury restaurants. Shopping sprees. Spa retreats. Exclusive parties. Every picture looked like an advertisement for wealth. But something didn't add up. If they'd sold their house because they needed money, why were they spending like lottery winners? That question haunted me until one humid evening when I invited Ethan onto the back porch. The sun was setting behind the trees. Crickets filled the silence between us. I handed him a glass of iced tea. "Son," he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I need you to tell me the truth." "What truth?" "The money." His shoulders stiffened. "The money from the house." He looked down. "It's mostly gone." For a second I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "Mostly gone?" He nodded. "Barely. How much did you sell the house for?" $700,000. I nearly dropped my glass. $700,000. Enough money to change most families' lives forever. Enough money to eliminate debt, invest wisely, retire comfortably. Instead, it had vanished. Where did it go? His voice was barely above a whisper. "Vanessa handled everything." "What does that mean?" "She invested in a boutique with one of her college friends." I waited. There was also the SUV. I kept waiting. A wellness retreat in Arizona. My jaw tightened. Designer furniture. Silence. Luxury vacations. More silence. Then came the sentence that made my stomach twist. "And her birthday party." "Birthday party?" He nodded without looking at me. "It cost about $22,000. I stared at my son in disbelief. "22,000. He closed his eyes. I tried to stop her. Those words finally made me look at him differently. "What happened?" "I told her we needed to save the money." "And?" He gave a hollow laugh. "She said I worried too much." I could almost hear Vanessa saying it. Confident, dismissive, certain that consequences only happen to other people. Then Ethan said something I'll never forget. "She kept saying we'd be fine because we'd stay with you and Mom." My heart skipped. "What?" He swallowed hard. "She said once we moved in here, we wouldn't have to worry about housing expenses anymore." Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't a financial emergency. This had been the plan. Sell the house. Spend the money. Move on to my property. Live comfortably while someone else carried the burden. That night, Grace and I sat together in complete silence after Ethan went back to the guest house. Finally, she spoke. "I don't think they're planning to leave." I looked toward the lights glowing inside the guest house. Neither of us noticed the expensive champagne bottles sitting on their patio table. Neither of us heard Vanessa laughing on the phone with her sister. But if we had, we would have heard the sentence that changed everything. "Don't worry," Vanessa laughed. "His parents have a huge house. They'll never say no." She had no idea. The biggest mistake of her life wasn't spending $700,000. It was believing my kindness meant I had no limits. And very soon, she was going to find out exactly where that line was drawn. There are moments in life when your instincts whisper the truth long before your mind is willing to accept it. For weeks mine had been screaming. Every expensive package, every luxury purchase, every smug smile Vanessa wore while living rent-free on my property told me the same thing. She wasn't planning her future. She was planning mine. Or rather, she was planning to take it. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Grace had spent the morning making her famous homemade chicken soup. The entire house smelled of rosemary, garlic, and fresh bread. It was the kind of peaceful afternoon we'd always dreamed retirement would feel like. Simple, comfortable, safe. Then the front door opened. Ethan and Vanessa walked in without knocking. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them asked if we had a minute. Instead, they sat down at our kitchen table as if they owned the place. Vanessa folded her perfectly manicured hands together. So? She smiled. We've been talking. Something about that smile instantly made my stomach tighten. I slowly placed my coffee mug on the table. About what? The guest house. I nodded. What about it? She sighed dramatically. It's just too small. Grace looked at me. I looked back at Vanessa. She continued before either of us could answer. The air conditioner is noisy. Ethan keeps bumping his head on the doorway. The kitchen feels cramped. She laughed softly, as though we were discussing a minor inconvenience. I mean, it's fine for a vacation. Then she leaned forward. But not for living. I already knew where this conversation was heading. I simply wanted to hear her say it. So, I asked quietly, what exactly are you suggesting? Her smile grew wider. We think it makes more sense if we move into the main house. Silence. The words hung in the air like smoke. Grace stopped stirring the soup. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly sounded louder. Tick, tick, tick. You want? I spoke slowly. To move into our home? Vanessa nodded enthusiastically. You barely use the upstairs. There are 6 bedrooms. It just seems practical. Practical. That word nearly made me laugh. 32 years of mortgage payments. 32 years of overtime. Skipped vacations. Missed luxuries. Countless sacrifices. Reduced to one word. Practical. Ethan finally spoke. It would only be temporary, Dad. I turned toward him. For how long? He hesitated. We're still figuring that out. I couldn't help myself. I let out a slow breath. The last time you said temporary, you sold a house for $700,000. Vanessa's smile disappeared. That's not fair. No? I leaned forward. Tell me what's fair. You sold the home your mother and I helped you buy. You spent almost every dollar. And now, I looked directly into her eyes. You expect us to hand over the home we've spent 30 years paying for. Her expression hardened instantly. We're family. Family helps family. I nodded. You're right. It does. But family also respects boundaries. Family doesn't treat generosity like an entitlement. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vanessa crossed her arms. So that's it? You're seriously saying no? For the first time since they'd arrived, I answered without hesitation. Yes, one word. Calm, firm, final, no. The silence afterward was deafening. Then came the explosion. Vanessa jumped to her feet so quickly her chair crashed onto the hardwood floor. Are you kidding me? Her voice echoed through the kitchen. You have all this space. You don't need it. Grace stood beside me. We do need it. It's our home. Vanessa ignored her completely. Instead, she pointed directly at me. You'd rather let your own son struggle than share a few rooms? I slowly stood. I'd rather my son learn responsibility than believe other people's homes belong to him. Her face turned bright red. Ethan stepped forward nervously. Maybe everyone should calm down, no. Vanessa snapped. Then she looked back at me. You think you're teaching us a lesson? No, I answered quietly. I'm protecting what's left of my family. Those words pushed her over the edge. You arrogant old man. Grace gasped. Ethan froze. I remained perfectly still. If you think you're keeping this house forever, Vanessa hissed, you're wrong. For the first time since she'd entered my home, I saw exactly who she really was. Not someone under stress. Not someone making mistakes. Someone who genuinely believed she deserved everything she'd never earned. And deep inside, a cold realization settled over me. This conversation wasn't over. It was only beginning. Because the next decision Vanessa made would cost her more than money. It would cost her everything. People often believe revenge begins with anger. They're wrong. Real revenge begins the moment your anger disappears. The moment your heart grows quiet. The moment you realize someone has crossed a line they can never uncross. That's exactly what happened in my kitchen that Sunday afternoon. The silence after I told Vanessa no felt almost unreal. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound in the room was the soup gently simmering on the stove, filling the house with the comforting aroma of rosemary and garlic. Normally, that smell reminded me of home. That afternoon, it reminded me how quickly peace can disappear. Vanessa stared at me, as though she couldn't process what she'd just heard. People like her weren't used to hearing the word no, not from friends, not from family. Certainly not from the people she believed she could manipulate. Her lips curled into a sarcastic smile. So that's your final answer? I nodded. It is. She laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because she genuinely believed I would change my mind. You'd rather watch your own son suffer? I looked at Ethan. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. He wasn't suffering because I had refused him. He was suffering because he'd spent months refusing to stand up to his wife. Your son isn't homeless, I said calmly. He has a fully furnished guest house. He has food. He has 2 healthy hands. And he has every opportunity to rebuild his life. Vanessa folded her arms. You really think you're teaching us responsibility? No, I answered quietly. I'm teaching you boundaries. The smile vanished from her face. So after everything we've been through, you won't even share a few empty bedrooms? Grace finally stepped forward. Our home isn't empty. It's filled with 32 years of memories. We raised Ethan here. We buried our dreams here while building his. We worked weekends, skipped vacations, missed birthdays because overtime paid the mortgage. Her voice trembled. You don't get to walk in and act like we've done nothing to deserve this home. For a split second, I thought Vanessa might finally understand. Instead, she rolled her eyes. I swear, she muttered. You two are so dramatic. That sentence landed harder than any insult. Grace's eyes filled with tears, not because of disrespect, because she suddenly realized the young woman she'd welcomed into our family had never appreciated a single sacrifice we'd made. I reached for my wife's hand. We're done here. You need to go back to the guest house. Vanessa didn't move. Instead, she took one slow step toward me, then another. Her breathing became heavier. Ethan finally looked up. Vanessa. She ignored him. You think you're better than us? No, I think this is my house. Her jaw tightened. And one day, she whispered, it'll be ours anyway. Those words hit me like ice water. So that's what this had always been about. Not temporary help, not financial hardship. Inheritance. She had already decided our home belonged to her. I looked directly into her eyes. As long as Grace and I are alive, this house belongs to us. And after we're gone, I'll make sure it goes to the people who respect it. Something inside her snapped. Before I could react, her arm flew across the table. Crack. The sound exploded through the kitchen. A burning pain shot across my cheek. My head turned sideways from the force. For one endless second, everything stopped. Grace screamed. Daniel. Ethan stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The soup continued bubbling on the stove as though nothing had happened. I slowly turned back toward Vanessa. My cheek burned. My ears rang. But inside I felt nothing. No rage, no panic, only absolute clarity. I looked at my son. Ethan. My voice was calm. Too calm. Take your wife and leave my house. Dad. His voice cracked. I said. I stared directly at him. Leave. Vanessa suddenly looked uncertain. Perhaps she expected me to yell, to threaten, to argue. Instead, I simply walked to the front door and opened it. Without another word. Without another glance. Without another chance. Grace stood beside me, tears streaming down her face. Ethan gently grabbed Vanessa's arm. For the first time all afternoon, she didn't resist. An hour later, the guest house was dark. Our home was silent. Grace sat beside me with an ice pack against my cheek. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she whispered, "What are you going to do?" I stared through the kitchen window into the fading evening light. Then I picked up my phone. There was one person I needed to call. A woman who had helped us prepare for the impossible years ago. Our family attorney. Because buried deep inside paperwork no one had bothered to read was a single clause. One sentence. One signature. One legal protection. And before the week was over, that forgotten clause would erase more than $2 million from Ethan and Vanessa's future forever. Neither of them had any idea. The slap they thought ended an argument had actually started the most devastating consequence of their entire lives. There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who read every page before signing a legal document, and those who assume the fine print doesn't matter. Vanessa belonged to the second group. She thought consequences only existed for other people. She was about to discover how expensive that assumption could become. The morning after the slap, I woke before sunrise. Sleep had barely touched me, Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Crack. Not because it hurt physically. The redness on my cheek had already begun to fade. It was what the slap represented. Disrespect. Entitlement. The belief that violence could erase a boundary. Grace quietly set a cup of coffee beside me at the kitchen table. "You don't have to do this if you're unsure," she whispered. I looked at her. "I've never been more certain." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then finish it." I picked up my phone. The first call wasn't to the police. It was to Rebecca Hayes, the attorney who had managed our family's estate planning for nearly a decade. She answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Daniel. It isn't." The seriousness in my voice immediately changed hers. "What happened?" I took a slow breath. "My daughter-in-law assaulted me yesterday." "Silence then. I'm coming to the office. Bring every trust document." An hour later, Grace and I were sitting across from Rebecca inside her downtown office. She carefully listened as I described everything. Every word, every insult, every second. She never interrupted. When I finished, she quietly opened a thick leather binder. I hoped we'd never need this. She flipped through page after page before stopping. "There it is." She turned the document toward me. Printed in clear legal language was a paragraph I hadn't thought about in years. Rebecca adjusted her glasses. "You insisted on creating this trust to protect Ethan's future." I nodded. "And I insisted on adding one additional protection. The violence clause." Grace slowly exhaled. Rebecca continued. "If a beneficiary or the spouse of a beneficiary commits an act of physical violence against either grantor, all remaining undistributed assets are immediately forfeited." I stared at the page. Although I'd signed it years ago, seeing those words now felt completely different. "How much remains?" Rebecca typed a few numbers into her laptop. After a moment, she looked back at us. "The original $700,000 was only an early distribution. There is still," she paused, "approximately $2.1 million remaining." The room became silent. Even though I'd known there was money left, hearing the number spoken aloud still took my breath away. Stocks, investment accounts, vacation property, future appreciation, everything. "And if the clause is activated?" Rebecca folded her hands. "It immediately transfers to the contingent beneficiary." Grace smiled faintly. "Our granddaughter." Rebecca nodded. "Emma, a 7-year-old little girl who loved horses, collected stuffed animals, and believed she would someday become both a veterinarian and an astronaut. She had no idea that her future was about to change forever. Neither did her parents." Before leaving Rebecca's office, I asked one final question. "Can this decision be reversed later?" She didn't hesitate. "No. That's why it's called an irrevocable trust. If you trigger it, there's no going back." I looked out the office window for several long seconds. Some people would call what I was about to do revenge. They'd be wrong. Revenge would have been screaming, throwing them out, trying to hurt them emotionally. This was accountability. Vanessa had crossed a line that no amount of apologies could erase. She didn't simply insult me. She assaulted me, inside my own home, in front of my wife. The consequences belonged to her, not me. I turned back toward Rebecca. "File everything." She nodded once. "I'll begin immediately." That afternoon I made my second phone call. This time, to Michael Grant, one of the toughest criminal attorneys in the state. He listened carefully before asking only one question. "Were there witnesses?" "My wife. And my son." "Good." His answer surprised me. "That makes this very straightforward. I want to press charges." He didn't try to talk me out of it. Instead, he simply replied, "I'll have the paperwork filed before the end of the day." As I ended the call, I looked through the kitchen window toward the guest house. The lights were on. Vanessa was laughing, completely unaware. She still believed this was just another family argument. She thought a simple apology would eventually fix everything. She had absolutely no idea that the legal process had already begun. And once the first document reached her hands, the fortune she'd already imagined spending would disappear forever. People often think the most painful part of justice is the punishment. It isn't. The most painful part is the moment someone realizes they destroyed their own future. No excuses. No one left to blame. Just consequences. That moment arrived exactly 1 week later. It was a Thursday morning. Grace was reading in the living room while I watered the roses outside. The neighborhood was quiet. Birds chirped from the oak trees. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Then a white sedan slowly pulled into our driveway. A man in a gray suit stepped out carrying a large envelope. He walked past me without saying a word, straight toward the guest house. I already knew why he was there. A process server. Justice had officially arrived. I watched from a distance as Vanessa opened the door wearing designer workout clothes and sunglasses pushed up on her head. She smiled politely. That smile disappeared the second she read the envelope. What is this? The process server answered calmly. You've been served. He turned around and walked away. For several seconds, she simply stood there staring at the paperwork. Then, no. Her scream echoed across the backyard. Ethan. She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. Grace stepped onto the porch beside me. It's starting, I nodded. No, I replied quietly. It's finishing. 40 minutes later, my phone rang. Ethan. His voice cracked before he even spoke. Dad, what have you done? I've held someone accountable. You filed criminal charges? I did. She's family. I closed my eyes. So was I. Silence. Then he whispered, it was one mistake. I answered without raising my voice. No, the slap was one action. The entitlement started months before that. You watched her spend $700,000. You watched her treat your mother with disrespect. You watched her demand our home. And when she hit me, you said nothing. His breathing became heavier. Finally he asked, can you please stop this? I can't. You can. I won't. Another long silence. Then I spoke the words that changed his life forever. There's something else you need to know. What? The family trust. He hesitated. What about it? It contained a protection clause. For violence against your mother or me. I could almost hear his heartbeat through the phone. Dad, if the clause is triggered, the remaining inheritance is permanently redirected. His voice became almost inaudible. How much? Just over $2 million. Nothing, not a single sound. Then you can't be serious. I am. Who gets it? I looked toward the swing set in our backyard where my granddaughter Emma loved to play whenever she visited. Emma, he gasped. No, the money now belongs to your daughter. It will stay protected until she's an adult. You and Vanessa will never have access to it. His breathing turned into quiet sobs. My God, he whispered. Vanessa is going to lose her mind. I answered honestly. She already did. 2 weeks later, there was a knock at our front door. Grace opened it. Vanessa stood outside alone. No expensive handbag. No designer sunglasses. No confident smile. Only swollen eyes. Can we talk? I remained standing. I didn't offer her a seat. She looked around the room before speaking. I want to apologize. I waited. I'm sorry. Still, I waited. Finally, she continued. If you drop the charges, there it is. I interrupted. She blinked. What? That's not an apology. That's a negotiation. Tears filled her eyes. I was under stress. So was I. I wasn't thinking. You thought clearly enough to slap me. I've learned my lesson. I looked directly into her eyes. No, you've learned there are consequences. Those are two very different things. She broke down crying. I'll do anything. I slowly shook my head. There's only one thing you can't do. What? Undo what happened. Grace quietly opened the front door. Our conversation is over. Vanessa stood there for another few seconds, hoping, waiting, praying one of us would change our minds. We didn't. She walked away without another word. As I watched her leave, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not happiness. Closure. Because the revenge was never about watching someone suffer. It was about protecting the people who still deserved a future. And in just a few days, a judge would make everything official. The final chapter was about to begin. People ask me all the time if I got my revenge. I always give them the same answer. No, because revenge is fueled by anger. What happened to my family wasn't revenge. It was justice. Justice simply arrived wearing the face of consequences. 6 weeks after Vanessa slapped me, we stood inside a Fulton County courtroom. The room smelled of old wood, fresh coffee, and nervous anticipation. Vanessa sat beside her attorney. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had demanded my home. Her expensive clothes were gone. The arrogance had disappeared. Even the way she sat had changed. Her shoulders slumped. Her hands trembled. Across the aisle, Grace reached over and quietly squeezed my hand. You ready? I nodded. I've been ready since the day she crossed that line. The hearing began. Vanessa's lawyer tried to paint the incident as nothing more than a family disagreement. Your Honor, he argued. My client was under enormous emotional and financial pressure. This was an isolated moment of frustration, not a pattern of violence. Our attorney, Michael Grant, calmly stood. With respect, he said, declining to let two healthy adults move into your private home is not provocation. My client exercised a legal boundary. The defendant answered that boundary with physical violence. There is nothing complicated about this case. Then, Grace testified. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't seek sympathy. She simply described exactly what happened. The shouting, the insults, the slap, the silence that followed. When she finished, the courtroom became completely still. The judge looked directly at Vanessa. Being under stress does not excuse assault. Moments later, the ruling was announced. Vanessa received a criminal conviction for the assault, a substantial fine, mandatory anger management classes, and a protective order preventing her from coming near our home. It wasn't prison. I had never wanted prison. I wanted accountability. And accountability had finally arrived. 3 days later, Rebecca called. It's official. The trust clause has now been permanently activated. I slowly closed my eyes. So? It's done? Yes. The remaining assets, approximately $2.1 million, have been legally transferred into an irrevocable education and welfare trust for Emma. I smiled for the first time in months. My granddaughter's future is safe. It is. And neither Ethan nor Vanessa can ever access those funds. Never. That single word echoed through my mind. Never. There would be no appeals, no loopholes, no second chances. The clause they ignored had become the consequence they could never escape. A few days later, there was another knock at our front door. This time, it was Ethan. Alone. The moment I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted. Older, broken, Dad. His voice cracked. Can we talk? I stepped onto the porch and quietly closed the door behind me. I know why you're here. He lowered his head. I should have stopped her. Yes, I should have listened when you warned us. Yes, I thought everything would somehow work itself out. I looked at my son for a long moment. I know. Tears filled his eyes. I lost everything. I gently shook my head. No, you still have your daughter. You still have your health. You still have the chance to rebuild your life. The only thing you truly lost was the future you refused to protect. He covered his face and cried. For the first time since all of this began, I saw genuine remorse. Not fear. Not manipulation. Remorse. I placed a hand on his shoulder. I love you, Ethan. I always will. But loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. He nodded silently. I understand. I wasn't sure if he truly did. But it was the first honest conversation we'd had in months. Today, 8 months have passed. Grace and I still live in the same home. Every Sunday, she still makes her famous rosemary soup. The house is peaceful again. Emma visits every weekend. She runs through the backyard laughing, completely unaware that her future is already protected. She still talks endlessly about becoming a veterinarian and an astronaut. In that order. And every time she says it, I smile. Because thanks to one forgotten clause, she'll have every opportunity to chase those dreams. As for Vanessa, she completed her court-ordered anger management classes. She and Ethan now rent a modest apartment. The luxury SUV is gone. The designer lifestyle is gone. The entitlement is gone. And the millions she believed would eventually become hers will never belong to her. Not because I hated her, but because actions have consequences. Looking back, people often ask whether I regret saying no that Sunday afternoon. The truth? I only regret one thing. I wish I'd said it sooner. Because boundaries don't destroy families. Entitlement does. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can leave your children isn't money. It's teaching them that respect is worth more than any inheritance. Some debts are paid with dollars. Others are paid with consequences. Vanessa paid with both. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotionally powerful revenge stories every week. Now tell me in the comments, if you were in Daniel's place, would you have forgiven them, or would you have done exactly the same thing? Until next time, remember this, karma doesn't always arrive quickly. But when it does, it never misses.